Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
And we're back for part 2. I'm here with Ollie. If you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you do. We had a really interesting conversation about really everything that sort of led up throughout Ollie's career, from becoming a lawyer, working with the Premier League, Formula One, a startup, and getting into eSports, and then founding his own business, and all of the craziness that ensued there until I think we're a bit more up to date now, aren't we? We're kind of a bit closer to the present day. So we're going to start talking about that. So if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that. I thoroughly recommend it, and it will give a lot of context to what we're going to talk about now. So yeah, you said the last thing you said was the after the messy acquisition and all the drama that took place there, you had to go and get a job. So what was that? What did that look like?
Funny enough, my investor, or one of my angel investors in London United, is also a very successful entrepreneur and IP practitioner and whatever else, owned a stake in a recruitment company. And this guy calls me and says, Steve has suggested I speak to you about this role. I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. It was a boxing role, but it was general counsel. And I was just like, not sure I want to be a lawyer, but boxing, I love it. It'd get me back in the hamster wheel. But the reason I said it was interesting is it's interesting that my investor, who has invested in me, is trying to then help me get a job, knowing what's happening with London United, if that makes sense. So I just thought that shows his true character. And I went for the role. I was in two minds about it, did quite a lot of research, but ultimately needed to pay the bills. And it paid the bills and got me back in the hamster wheel of not just, something to put in the CV that shows you can still work for someone else. We talked about unemployability earlier, but also got me back in the mix with people like Sky Sports at the top level, brands, etc. Gave me an infrastructure around me, so it was quite interesting. So I did that for a year.
And then you did that for a year, okay? And then why a year? What happened at the year mark?
So I got to be careful what I say here, but often people say, well, once you've worked for yourself, you can't work for someone else. But actually, and I suppose I could say that, but the reason I left was because I didn't want to be a lawyer in a business like that. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I thought it was going to become a far more operational role where I could put my skill set to good use, but I couldn't make the changes because the guy who headed up the business and ran it, he himself, I suppose, as an entrepreneur, had his own mind about how he wanted to operate, and I just couldn't get him on the journey. I know I'm not telling tales out of school. We'd sit there and say, right, this is what needs to happen. Yeah, let's talk about things like appraisals. Got to appraisals with the staff, but I just couldn't get him to go on the journey. And from a focus point of view, he wanted me to be a lawyer, and he wanted me to operate in a way that I wasn't comfortable with as well. To which I said, well, do you know what? Why don't we just have a discussion and see what we can do going forward and some other things? And that's what happened. I mean, I'm giving you the discrete version, obviously, the clean version. The abridged version. But, from a positive perspective, it was great because it opened me up to another industry I'd never worked in. Throughout my career, I actually have a trend of going into industries I've never worked in and almost taking a duck to water, so to speak. Football, Formula One, eSports. I've had various degrees of success there, and I went into boxing. And boxing is a very closed-off sport. It's very cliquey. So they look at you as an outsider trying to do things your way, and they'll push back. But I actually got in, did a decent job, got out with my integrity intact, which is now why I'm still working around that industry. But I just felt that the opportunity on the table for that business was huge, and it was opportunity is spoiled, and history will come to show us whether I was right or wrong over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah. So then what happened then? What did you end up going to do?
So actually, the CEO said to me, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to set up an athlete content creator management agency. I'm going to bring my skill set, work with content creators, work with athletes. But I'm going to try and tell the story first. I'm going to start with boxing. I'm going to start with motorsport, hopefully, and content creators. I'm going to set up Summit Sports. And it's to take a an offering to athletes that I don't think they get in the right manner at the moment. Let's call it 360. Let's legal, commercial, management, PR, storytelling, wealth management, mental health, everything in the one place to help them focus on being the best athlete that they can be. And he goes, "That's a good idea." I said, "Oh, thank you. Just don't make my life difficult then, please," for operating in the same circles. But that moment came around because I'd seen how bad that the athletes were managed and promoted when I was working there. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this.
In what sense? What do you mean bad?
Well, if you look at some of the management around athletes, all they were focused on was 20% of what they could get. It wasn't about what you're going to do if you get injured tomorrow. What IP creation is on the table for down the line? How do we tell your story better? Because if we tell your story better, that's going to generate you more exposure, eyeballs, commercial deals, better promotional contract. So that's from a management perspective. And from a promotional perspective, it's like the athletes used and abused is probably, is it too strong? Potentially too strong a term, but you'll get what I'm trying to say. They get utilized when they're needed and then they get forgotten about. And who's looking after them in that period when they're forgotten about? And that's why the athletes we work about, we try and keep them at the forefront of everything we're doing and instill into them the importance of them doing it as well. Now, if they don't want to do it, that is up to them, but then there'll be consequences for them down the line, and they'll look at others getting deals and they go, why is that person getting a deal? And it's like, well, because that's what they're doing is helping generate reach and exposure, peak performance, peak earnings, peak revenue.
So just being treated more of as an asset rather than a tool, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Know your value and know how to extract your value.
Fair enough. So that's your current company then, Summit Sports. So how's that been going? How long has it been going for, actually? Not long, right?
We had our launch party around March this year.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And yeah, how's it been going?
It's been going great. I mean, again, I've decided to take on a poison chalice is too strong, but I've tried to come into an industry that has got a lot of, well, I've got to use my terms very carefully, but if you think of boxing, a lot of people just think it's dodgy, don't they? They think there's elements of criminality around it. And I'm not saying that is accurate, but when newcomers come into a sport that is quite closed off and not that welcoming, you've got to tread lightly and not step in people's toes. And that is what we've done. So we've come in from scratch. We've disrupted a little bit. We've signed athletes. I think it's always the most difficult bit at the start is to get the brand out there and show that you can be trusted and people should work with you. And we've done that across each of the verticals that we've formed. We're doing an angel investment round at the moment. We've brought in some. It's taken longer than I hope, but it's also because I've done it strategically. We are going to expand into another vertical later this year once I get my, fingers crossed, my agent's license, which I'm sitting in mid-November. We are looking at some forms of IP creation. Like, we're doing what we said we'd do. We've got some credibility around us. Adam Smith, who was at Sky Sports for 30 years, the voice behind the mic. If you've watched any old fight on Sky, it's that gravelly voice. Adam's involved. We're doing things the right way. We're doing it slowly. We're not stepping on toes. And we're trying to prove ourselves because we know that that's how the big names then will come.
And is eSports on in any way in your radar anymore, or are you intentionally kind of now putting that to the side and focusing on more, I don't know, traditional legacy sports, whatever you want to call it?
Well, when I created the content creator division, I anticipated hopefully having maybe some esports players in there, but as of yet, that has not materialized. Funnily enough, I am hosting a panel in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, on esports and infrastructure at a conference in a few weeks. So I'm still keeping myself around the scene, and I still informally advise an esports org, a guy that I'm very close to. I still give him the benefit of some of my time once a month, just for no reward for me, just to help. So I'm still around the scene because I always think it's a shame if you have that knowledge not to be able to utilize it and pass on some learnings.
Yeah, I agree. I do a similar thing. I do a couple of pro bono advisory slots with businesses that I just think are awesome, people that I think are really cool, or industries that I want to just remain kind of somewhat active in. I think it's also, it is somewhat selfish aside from just wanting to see people succeed. It's like, this is interesting to me, and it's a muscle that I don't want to sort of weaken. You know what I mean? As well, it's like keeping in the loop and staying kind of up to date with it.
But the problem, sorry, Greg, I cut across
no,
you.
it's fine.
No, I was going to say the problem is you often end up doing too much for free, though.
Yeah, you do have to be careful.
Your time, your time starts getting monopolized. You're like, I'm not being paid for this. It's not actually in the stuff that I don't like. The pro bono thing I mentioned, the equivalent of what you're doing, I don't mind. But then, someone comes to you and says, "We'd like you to be an advisor," and then 2 months down the line, you realize you've done these introductions, you've had these calls, you've done X, Y, and Z, and you're like, well, nothing's materialized yet.
Yeah. You do need to be careful with that for sure. And I think I've struck a fairly good balance of it, but it is easy to get pulled into it a little bit. Yeah, you're right. You do need to be careful with that. But as long as you're enjoying it and it's not having a detrimental effect on the other things you're doing day to day, I say go for it, because I do believe that knowledge shouldn't be gatekept, and for some people a fee isn't practical, and and they need it, and if there's an alignment there with them, why not? That's the way I see it. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
You hope that good things come back to good people, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But and just, there's, like you said, there's something to be said for just sharing experience, as well. I don't know. It's especially because the pro bono stuff I tend to do is for those that are clearly lacking in experience or insight on the world that we've spent years in. You just know that they're at an automatic disadvantage because they don't know that world, and so and there's one in particular who's quite isolated from that world, miles and miles away from London, and can't afford to move to somewhere with a bit more of a bustling startup scene, but trying to build something really ambitious and doing a really good job of it. And it's like, maybe that ignorance is good for them actually in some ways, because it's not setting up a certain amount of expectations and going down a road. They're just kind of doing it how they want to do it. But there are elements of that. It's like, I think it's important to keep them up to speed on. Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it's good people deserve whatever we can provide. And I've always been fascinated with the fact that I've been an advisor for the last 4 or 5 years, and I still don't really understand why people listen to me. I'm like, what, me? Because I'm known as the no bullshit guy, right? That's my thing, and it's still people book these sessions with me. I do all these pro bono hours and things like that, and then they come away from it, go, thank you, that was really helpful. I'm like, really? I just talked shit for 15 minutes at the end, and you took notes, and apparently that was useful. I don't get it, but all right. So I'm still completely confused as to why people listen to me. But there you go. But yeah, so exciting times. Young company about to start you are in the process of raising funds. So what's the plan? What's the trajectory, and what you're going to do with these funds when they land?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is heart and sleeve moment again. I never thought that I would have the same challenges of raising that I did at London United, and actually I said to myself, I'm not going to go through it all again. And when I was getting ready to launch, I had a couple of people that were going to fund us. They had exits that were materializing. Exits still haven't materialized, funnily enough.
Right.
So the pain threshold was a little bit higher than I'd hoped. But
hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
Again, you might have some advice here as well. It's an agency. We're an agency. So when you're raising money, where do funds go? It goes to your OPEX, doesn't it? It's going to pay people's salaries. It's going to help you grow. We want to build a content house. We want to add a vertical. We need to look, do we do an acquisition, or do we just pay people's salaries to deliver? But the sales pitch is, you generate revenue by having the best people to deliver. So we've got to try and raise in that respect. We need to commercialize the assets that we've got, the athletes we've got. We want to be able to strategize and look at longer term partnerships and potentially acquisitions, as I just mentioned. And you need the funds to be able to give yourself the comfort blanket that you're not always looking over your shoulder. So, we'd like to build a content house. We would like to add football as a vertical, and there's three ways I could do that. One of which, all of which probably need funding, but one of which needs far more significant funding, but we could do it in 2 steps. And then we need a couple more bodies in the business because, as I say, we're signing some really good and interesting and diverse athletes. If you look at our roster, it's really quite interesting. But we've got to be bashing doors down. We've got to be talking to brands that align with these athletes and having conversations with them. And you'll know what it's like as a founder, as a CEO. You're doing 20 different things, and then when you think you're going to do something else, a curveball gets thrown, or your team needs your time, as it happened. I think in the break. So funding, just money makes life easier, doesn't it? It's very simple.
In theory.
In theory, yeah.
In theory. I mean, the expression "more money, more problems" does also ring true as well.
Yeah, but I don't mind those problems.
Yeah, because at least you can eat some caviar while you're dealing with the problem, But yeah.
No. Caviar's
you're
not
right.
on the budget. Caviar's not on the budget.
It's not on the budget.
It'll be Aldi's
crab
chicken.
sticks.
Aldi's chicken.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Got to keep the CFO happy.
CFO.
But, I mean,
CFO.
Not yet. The future CFO. But how do you? But I mean, to your point about balancing all these, spinning all these plates. It's because it is true. I mean, early on, a founder is not a CEO. There's a very distinct difference. There's very few founders that get the opportunity to become a CEO, in my opinion, and that transition itself is a really turbulent one, and that's a whole other story, which maybe we can pick apart in a moment. But it's an interesting one. But what was my point? But how do you balance? I mean, especially the fundraising piece, because this is one that I often, as you can imagine, as an advisor, I get asked a lot. What should be our strategy be? We want to raise money. Everyone wants to raise bloody money, right? That's the thing, and no one's usually prepared to just do the actual work. Everyone thinks that raising funds is going to be the silver bullet, and my thing that I always explain to people is that raising money is a full-time job. It's an incredibly intensive, time-consuming process that requires your full attention if you really want to do it successfully. So how are you finding the current situation where you're looking at fundraising, but also you've got a business, you've signed athletes, you've got a service to deliver. How are you balancing that? Are you balancing that?
I mean, I suppose the honest answer is with difficulty. It's been a bit stop-start because, again, I've been trying to do it strategically. I brought in some angels that made sense to the business, and then you've got a little bit of money. Our overheads aren't big. I have got staff, but our overheads aren't big in the grand scheme of things. So it gives me time to go out and say, right, I'm going to continue to show some momentum because that's going to enhance the offering when I come back to the pitch deck. But it is a challenge. It's a challenge. I've tried to do it differently this time by not doing cold approaches. I've tried to do everything warm and, again, strategic. And you're not at the time scale of other. You're at the time scale of others, sadly, aren't you? So you send a deck. Someone goes, "It's great," but let's speak in 3 weeks. Like, oh, fuck's sake! I really needed to be speaking to you now. Or, I want to introduce you to someone, and then they don't do the introduction, and you're like prodding them, and like, yeah, I got to do it. Like, it doesn't take long to do an introduction. Come on, man. Or the financial model needs change, and you're crap at doing Excel, so you got to find someone to help you do it. And then it's invariably there's curveballs thrown. I get it from my team. It's like they sometimes need a bit more micromanaged than I would like, but again, it's your baby, isn't it? So you want to make sure everything is done to the way that you would do it. Someone made a really good comment to me actually recently. Said, "Ollie, you expect people to work the way you work, and unless you do everything yourself, you're never going to get that." Which is why I just have to juggle. I feel like a circus act at times, doing 20 different things. But I do say to the guys, I've got to go dark. I've got to do this. I've got to get this deck done. I've got to have these calls. Like, just fend for yourselves, store it up. But I've been trying to do it more strategically. I've got an issue that I need to try and address now as well, which I'm trying to get my head around so I can go back out to the market, which I might ask you for some pro bono advice at the end of this. But yeah, it's juggling. It's working hard. I do a lot of hours in between trying to see my family.
But we do take on too much, don't we? This has always been an issue of mine. I remember, back in the day when I used to actually do interviews for real jobs. it was even a thing that I would mention there when people would ask me, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Do you know what I mean? And I would say, oh, I take on too much. Like that's obviously a thing. And it's because it's a bit of a control thing. I was honest about that, and I always knew it was a problem. And I would always lie though and say I'm working on it. You know what I mean? To get the job.
No.
But in reality, I was like, I just need people to tell me to stop, because
We're control freaks,
you know,
aren't we? We're control freaks, essentially.
yeah, to a degree. It's very difficult. But it's also, I think beyond that, there's something else there, at least for me, which is it's also about just having such a busy brain, lots of ideas, and just if I don't do these, they're not going to get going. You know, there's an urgency to things. It's like, you know, it's there. I need to get it out. Otherwise, it's just going to plague me. It's going to keep me up at 5 a.m. I need to just get it done. I need to get it out. And I take on the project, and then it turns out a few months later that was a bad idea. I've now overwhelmed. Okay, time to knock that on the head. So I'm constantly, you know, pruning the various amount of projects and ideas and whatever else that I've started. And it's a shame, because I know that actually if I was to have brought that down in the first place, the chances of success of a lot of these things would have been increased.
I know.
You know what I mean?
I'm smiling wryly. I'm smiling wryly because I agree with you. But also, I did something recently where I had an incoming respondence with someone. They sent me an email. I flick it onto someone in my team and said, "What do you think about this? Because actually, I think it's pertinent for you to give me a view." And I got a response back. What do you think?
Yeah. Not yeah. Because ultimately that's what it is. Like I have you know, I've got a board of advisors and stuff, and as you do, and it still pains me when the advice that I get wasn't what I assumed it would be, you know. And it's just crazy, like, given what I do, and you know, you get so married to a specific thing and an idea, and you're, oh, this is brilliant, oh, the advisor's going to love this, I'll send it to them, and they come, no, this is shit. I'm like, oh, really? I'm still going to do it. But yeah, it's I think it's an illness. I honestly do. I think I think we've got something wrong with us.
Hiring is the biggest challenge over and above money. Hiring is the biggest challenge as a founder, isn't it? I remember at London United. I went with my gut on a hire, and it backfired. And I don't need to go. I mean, it was a commercial role, and it was someone not from the industry. And I thought a fresh approach to tackling the brands might be interesting, but they didn't really take to it like a duck to water. Didn't have the work ethic, and it's a big decision. What do you do? Do you fire that person? I mean, it's a harsh term to say fire that person, but do you decide to part ways with them? Which probably is the gut reaction, but your head's going, oh no, it's going to cause me so many headaches. I'm going to have to go out and hire someone else. I'm going to have to start again. I'm going to have to train them up. Oh, and they're so close to almost getting something over the line. So if I let that person go, I'm going to lose it. Hiring is a bollock. Managing staff.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I mean, it's a people's business. That's what I was taught very early on by my mentors in the startup world, very early on. And it absolutely is. And look, I mean, as someone that sort of cut my teeth in the startup world, being an individual contributor in sales, and then later running sales teams and all that, like, I have a very strong opinions on the commercial side of things. Obviously, now, you know, being, you know, having gone into CCO and then being a fractional CCO now occasionally too, like, people get hiring salespeople wrong all the time. Like, especially at the early stages, hiring that first commercial person, that first biz dev, that first SDR, whatever it is, they get it wrong all the time. And usually, I personally believe the main reason is because they haven't figured out how to sell it in the first place. So you're setting a lot of usually it's setting up the person to fail from the very beginning.
Yeah,
because you could hire, you know, someone with 20 years sales experience and put them in your business. If you haven't got even like at least the beginnings of a sales playbook, then they're going to fail. Most people do not have the skill to create that playbook. They might say that they do, but they don't. And it's almost impossible to do it if you're not the one that's been there from day one, creating the business, the product, the offering. It's very difficult. It can be done, but then also it's about expectations. The reality is it's going to take them months to figure that out. Yeah. And if you're bringing someone in on the basis like you're paying them this salary and they've got to start generating results by month 6 or month 3 or whatever, you know, these crazy, you know, expectations, it's not going to happen. You've got to realize it's going to be a year at least, especially depending on your pipeline, your deal cycle and all that. Some deals can take 3 to 6 months to sign before money's in the bank. So you factor that in. You'd say, okay, let's say it's a minimum of 3 months for them to understand the offering, come up with a good pitch, refine the pitch, try it, see how it goes, keep messing with it. Let's say minimum of 3 months. Right. And then another 3 months before they can get anyone to actually do any form of commitment. And then another 6 to 12 months to get a contract signed and money in the bank.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And people don't know that. So they walk in and they're like, I want to see you starting to generate revenue within 6 months or 3 months. Yeah. It's like, come on, guys, what are we doing here? So I always tell people they need to invest more. Don't hire a salesperson too early. And people hire them too early all the fucking time. Sell first. Founder-led sales is really important, in my opinion.
Yeah, but again,
very, very
you're right, and I do open doors, but it's time, isn't it? Like, if I'm spending 6 hours today on the pipeline, of course, there's going to be a benefit there, but everything else it needs to do, I've got signed talent, I'm doing the contracts, I've got the contracts out to talent, I'm setting up meetings, I'm juggling my diary, I'm doing content with the athletes. So, you know what it's like. I don't need to list it, but
yeah, absolutely. It isn't easy. This is why, and I've talked about this a lot in this show, but this is actually, I haven't for a while. So maybe this is be good for the new audience that has kind of come across in the last couple of months. But I'm always banging on about a founder diary as a stream of consciousness thing. Get a Google document, have a shortcut to it on your phone, have a shortcut to it everywhere on all devices that you have. And it's just a stream of consciousness thing. Do it first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening, every day religiously. And then throughout the day, pepper in whatever's going on in your head and make it a habit. Make it like, your absolute religious, practice that you do as often as possible. And you just dump anything in there. Don't have to format it, don't have to make it look pretty, don't get obsessive about that. It's just about putting stuff in there, date, time, boom, put it in, bullet points, whatever you want to do. And if you do that consistently over a period of time, you'll be amazed how useful that is for all the stuff we're talking about, whether it's for hiring, whatever, because that is the foundations of your playbook. So for example, if you've done, like you say, a few hours of sales calls, and you've managed to close some deals, this, that, and the other, whatever, you go in there, what worked? Well, I said this sentence I hadn't said before and it resonated really well. That's quite cool. I'm going to say that again. Or I said this and it didn't quite land. Or, I tried this process, whatever it is. And you just record all this stuff as much as possible. And it's the beginning of your sales playbook. It's the beginning of your commercial playbook, your marketing playbook, your operational playbook, RevOps, like everything. Not to mention that if you're giving details like I did this today, I did that today, like it's also useful for, throw it in ChatGPT and turn it into a blog post. Like, do you know what I mean? And then you've got content. So I'm big on that.
I've heard really you mention Founders Diary before. I'm probably old school where I use my calendar and stick notes in them, and I still have my notebook beside me. I mean,
you can't control F a notebook and do a search for every mention of the word sales. You can't throw that into ChatGPT. You can't, like, this is why I'm always say to, like, I used to fire people for making notes on paper.
I wouldn't have lasted very long.
Yeah, but this is in sales, right? But like, in sales, I mean, there were other contributing factors too. It wasn't like I caught someone writing something down. I was like, right, you're out. I wasn't that much of an asshole. But like, yeah, if I, consistently saw people making notes on paper and not in the CRM, it's like, you're out, mate. Like, plus you haven't got the numbers. But because of this, it can't be replicable. It can't be scalable. It can't be, do you know what I mean? Learn from, you need to have that. In my opinion, sort of in a way.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. We have a pipeline, and I'm always saying to the guys, like, got to keep updated.
I've just got to quickly interrupt this episode for a quick announcement, and that is that if you are a tech founder, a CEO, a business owner, well, the chances are that's probably why you're listening to this show. It is called Founders Unplugged after all. And if that's the case, then you really need to listen to what I've got to say. So look, as someone that's been in the tech startup world now for a very, very long time, and as a founder and worked with lots of businesses globally, working in those companies has taught me a really big lesson. And that is that finding the right tools for your team can truly change your business. That's why I'm really excited that today's episode is sponsored by Deal. That's DEEL. It's an all-in-one platform for global teams. Deal is designed with the needs of a global workforce in mind. Seamless contract signing, easy expense uploads, in-platform time-off management. They can handle paperwork, exchange foreign salaries into local ones, and ensure compliance with local regulations, and loads more. Plus, its customer support team is available 24/7, and that is really, really important. If you're ready to see how Deal can transform your global operations, head to deal.com, that's DEEL.com, to book your demo today. So thank you so much for Deal for sponsoring today's episode. You can use the link in the description or the QR code on the screen down there somewhere. And now we'll get back to the episode. Yeah. and yeah, as founders, we're the worst. Like, don't look at my pipeline, Jesus Christ. Yeah, all that went out the window when I became the founder. You know what I mean? But I do keep my diary fairly up to date, so that's good. Fairly up to date. There are days where I forget about it, but no, honestly, that's like a hack. Basically, I tell people, do it, really, really do it, because it's so important, and also just to see the way that you evolve over time too. Like, it's amazing how often people stray from their initial vision, and the way that they describe it changes. So you meet a founder who's really struggling to pitch, which a lot of founders get to. They really struggle to pitch their concept once they're in it for a year or two. And then if you ask them how they or can go back to some sort of earlier version of how they're pitching it, that's usually much better, because it's become bloated and overcomplicated by the time it gets, they get too in their own head. And it's actually, once you strip away a lot of the bullshit and a lot of the terrible advice they've been given and awful stuff they've read and whatever else along that journey, if you go back to that, if they've had some record of it, you can look at it and go, do you know what? The way you've explained it here in one sentence is way better than the way you're explaining it now in 20 slides. Bring it back to first principles, bring it back to basics. So it's useful to see that journey too, Yeah.
That makes sense.
But what was it that was so terrible about the experience you had with like the first? What were some of the struggles you had? Do you think it was too early to bring in someone commercial?
No, I don't think so. I think I got to be careful what I say, but
it's all right. No one watches this show. It's fine. He's not watching.
He or she. You look at how that person ingratiates themselves into an industry, don't you? When we're doing events, when you're doing watch parties, when you're. I hate clock watchers. I was always taught, it was one of the things where you asked me in episode 1 about inspiration, entrepreneurial journey, and I mentioned my late grandfather, and I was always told, don't watch the clock. When I went to the law firm to do my work experience, I said to you, I was the last one in the filing room at 6:30 on a Friday night. I didn't watch the clock. And I have people that are 9 to 5. I know it says 9 to 5 and 9 to 6 in a contract, but come on, really what that means. You're being paid well. It's tricky,
isn't it?
It's tricky.
Like you said, you expect everyone. Someone said to you that you expect everyone to work as hard as you. They're not.
Well, that's it. So that was probably that was one of the issues. So there was the clock watching. There was the lack of ingratiation into the industry. There was there are a few other things, and it was just like, are you as vested in this? This is a big hire for me. This is a big deal. Are you invested and vested at the same time in this? And it just became apparent that the person wasn't. What I will say is, when I told that person the money and the funding wasn't materializing, I was going to have a problem, they dealt with it very well and amicably, and didn't create problems for me. And because I'd been good to that person throughout, they actually reciprocated, so to speak, and found another job.
It's tough, isn't it? Because I've had situations like that many times too, and I've been quite self-critical when it comes to those things. I think, okay, well, did I do a good enough job of keeping that initial spark that maybe of excitement I saw in the interview or the first couple of weeks? Did I do enough to keep that alive? Did I keep, were there enough communication channels? Was I doing enough of those war cry sort of speeches to get them pumped and to go out? You know what I mean? And I sort of internalize it a lot and think about that. Was I really keeping that vision and that motivation going? And quite often I think the answer was usually no, maybe not. Maybe I assumed that they could be a bit more autonomous than they could be.
Yeah.
Not everyone is capable of that, and sometimes they do need that drive, especially until they see their first wins.
Yes.
That's really important because of, as someone that's been that first hire many times in the past, until you get that first win, you're just thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, what I mean? And
you raised something interesting on that front. Sorry if I cut across you again.
No, it's fine.
I like to think as a boss or someone I inspire, I motivate, I communicate. Communication for me is hugely important. So we would regularly do a morning meeting. And actually I said, let's just do an end of day meeting because there's so much happening. We're on one place, or even though we're not in place, we'll jump on Discord.